All right. Good afternoon again, Minister Mitchell. Hope all is well with you today on this lovely Wednesday. Um, so recently, the port would have issued a post, a flyer promoting their business meeting for residents or licensees to come and learn more about the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. Of course, this comes after the back and forth between the government and the port in recent times. What is your response to them putting together this meeting now?
Well, in a civil society like ours, it's good, and in a democracy, for groups, various aggregations to get together. And certainly, licensees of the Grand Bahama Port Authority, a legitimate group interested in what is going to happen in Freeport and Grand Bahama. Just a word of caution, though. The governing processes in Freeport are going on interrupted. There's no fundamental break between the Grand Bahama Port Authority and the government of the Bahamas. So all of the normal processes are continuing. But the difficulty with regard to the policy on the acquisition of or change of ownership of the port to provide greater investment opportunities and better promotion of the city, that is an ongoing public policy discussion. What I think licensees and other people of goodwill in Freeport ought to be concerned about is not being dragged into an internecine warfare within the Grand Bahama Port Authority itself. Because the corporate entity, Grand Bahama Port Authority, is working quite well. There's no issue with the government. But the suspicion is there's some elements who are trying to organize, because they want the thing to go in a particular direction, they're trying to organize licensees to put up a fight in public, as if this is the government opposed to the licensees. And I think that should be avoided at all costs. And what should be avoided is the impression given that these people who are supposedly running an education campaign are being used by certain elements for wrong purposes. So I just want people to be very careful about that, not get dragged into something that they should not get dragged into, so that there's not an unfortunate consequence on their own reputations. Because this is a Bahamian city, this is the Bahamas government, and the Bahamas government and the Bahamians in the city are all working toward the objective of making the city successful. And no one should be allowed to be used as an instrument for the personal gain of individuals who do not have or may not have the best interests of the country and the city at heart.
Now, how do you view the timing of this particular meeting, given the ongoing back and forth and disagreements between the Port Authority and the government?
Well, it's very curious that all of a sudden people are interested in public education on this point. It is clear that whatever happens, the Bahamas government will not violate the provisions of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. All we're talking about here is the issue of its ownership and control, and whether or not the owners of the port have the ability not only to carry out their regulatory authority, but to carry out the provisions of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement, which call for certain infrastructural development and promotion of the city and bringing in investments from the city. So that's really the issue, and should not be confused with something which looks like a political argument and a partisan political argument between the port and the government. It's not that at all, and that's why I say people should be really careful not to be used as an instrument for something which they should not allow themselves to be used for.
Now, can you clarify the government's current stance on the Hawksbill Creek Agreement and its negotiations with the port?
Well, the provisions of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement stand, and the government has simply said through its prime minister that there is a need for a fresh injection of capital, a reset, if you will, to put in place the ability to promote the city, to make sure that its infrastructure does not run down, and to carry out all the other provisions of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. And that's a simple process. when the prime minister issued his first statement, you remember, he talked about how all the other islands in the country had an increase in its GDP, but Grand Bahama, which has the largest, second largest city in the country, has had a decrease in GDP. So that's a sign that the city is not performing to where it should be performing. And so we want to reverse those fortunes. If you look at the census figures, they're saying there's some 47,000 people and change living now on Grand Bahama Island, and that's about 5,000 less people than lived there 10 years ago. Notwithstanding Dorian, that should not be the case, because Freeport itself has been quite resilient. All the infrastructure is there. It's just a question of why the level of investment has fallen off. And there are a number of issues, many of them which are related to the regulator, which is the Grand Bahama Port Authority, and also the inability of the port, as it appears, not to be able to carry out the provisions of the Hawksbill Creek Agreement.
Now, what has the government or the port what have they done to address the concerns and the disagreements amongst one another? Have you guys sat down as yet? I know this has been ongoing for some time, and the Prime Minister is taking a stance, making sure that he holds them accountable for what they are supposed to do. So has the government taken any measures? Has the port taken any measures?
Well, you just have to look at the frantic activity which is going on in Grand Bahama now. You know, roads are being patched up and fixed, and all kinds of things are being said about the bridge and how it's been repaired. They've now, I think, fixing Tano Bridge, which I guess that just came to their attention as well. So some of the normal processes are going on. It's just that the city is underperforming economically. And it's underperforming economically because it needs an injection of capital. The injection of capital can come in two ways. Either the owners have to put the injection of capital, or you have to be able to get investment, which brings more capital into the city. And the evidence is that's not being done. So on a functional level, there's no disagreement about the way the place is being run. The question is, going forward, should the underperformance be allowed to continue? And that's what is being addressed.
And are there any specific actions or outcomes the government is looking forward from this?
Well, the talks are continuing. They're not in any way acrimonious. They're ongoing. And I'm satisfied at the end of the day, we will have a good result for Grand Bahama.
Okay. Any final thoughts on the meeting, on the port, the government?
Well, again, I just want to spread this word of caution. People should not be used for a purpose which is not a purpose for which they think they're being asked to contribute. It's very easy to be dragged and to be used by people for ill purposes. And I think people ought to be very careful that that should not happen.
Thank you, Minister. Now, recently, the opposition, Dr. Sands, they would have responded to the Prime Minister's decision to shuffle his cabinet. Any response to what Dr. Sands has been saying?
Well, I was appalled at the language. He called us pigs, essentially. This is unbecoming, inappropriate, foolish, just bad form. And, you know, I saw where the newspapers were attacking my response, in which I said, well, look, if you know what a pig looks like, I guess you can wake up in the mirror and see one. You know, and people said, well, this is inappropriate and you shouldn't have said this. But, you know, my axiom in politics is, you know, you respond in kind, starting with this sort of nasty language. And just talking with some of my colleagues overnight, what is remarkable to us is that here you have the chairman of the Free National Movement, an organization that failed the country in 4.5 years, failed the country, that tried to lock up members of parliament and failed in that. And this man, in the course of those events, was condemned judicially by a magistrate's court. The decision of the magistrate's court was backed up by the Court of Appeal, and that decision was backed up by the Privy Council. So at 3 levels of courts, this man was judicially condemned as a minister of the government. We know that just before just before The charges were brought. We know that a contract was renewed in the millions of dollars for the star witness in the trial against one of our former senators. We know also that he was dismissed because he violated the rules during the pandemic. So you ask yourself, someone in this position, what moral or ethical standing does he have to respond in this way? He has none. He has none, because what he stands on is a record of failure. So, Ronald Reagan said at the end of his last campaign, and a heckler was shouting out at him some bad or angry words, and his response was, "Oh, shut up," right? Because that's what you want to say, because it is simply inappropriate, unbecoming. He knows better. He was raised better. It is fine for an opposition party to disagree with policies, to say that, we don't think that these changes apply, or that they're good or they're bad changes, but then to personalize it by comparing us to pigs, I'm sorry, you crossed the line. And so, as they say in the playground, it takes one to know one.
Did you expect such a response?
I'm not sure, because, we are quite civil when we meet one another. He's a doctor, so he's trained to have a particular bedside manner. So it is kind of surprising, but it may be because of the internal pressures that are on him. Whether they're going to have a convention and a leadership race and all of that, all of these things may be on his mind for him to use language, which in my view is excessive and inappropriate. The prime minister chose his cabinet. We think we have a good team. Changing the cabinet and shuffling the cabinet is a flexible instrument which is available in the parliamentary system that we have. It is more flexible than the system in the United States, where there are defined departments, because the prime minister, when he looks at the whole array of choices available to him and the things that are going on in the country, he can reset things. So the system allows us to do that. In fact, the F&M did it themselves. So I'm not sure what the whole issue is. And I think that we have a good team. It's obvious that the prime minister has confidence in the team. The Progressive Liberal Party has confidence in the prime minister and the team, and I'm sure the team will do well. Dr. Sands is free to criticize the team and say, we don't think they're going to do well, but I'm sorry, when you describe us as pigs, that is crossing the line.
Now, once Dr. Sands would have made his statement, many persons went to social media to say, well, you are condemning the now government or the prime minister for shuffling his cabinet. However, the F&M administration would have done the same thing. What is your response?
Well, precisely. The history is that they had to do the same thing. Mr. Wells didn't end up being the same minister he was when he started. Mr. Frankie Campbell wasn't the same minister when he started. Lanisha Roll wasn't the same minister when she started. So I keep saying that in our system, we have to keep seeing these things like the prorogation of the House, like the changes in the cabinet and the tweaking of the portfolio allocations, as a kind of regular occurrence, because the system allows that. So there's no big deal as such. But what prime ministers do is they use it as a mechanism to tweak and reset, and to bring fresh energy to problems which may be old, and to bring fresh ideas to new problems as they come along. That's simply it. And we have, as citizens of the country, and Dr. Sands is a citizen of the Bahamas, in a free country, you have the ability to criticize the choices. Say, I don't think it will work. But in a civil polity, public language requires a different approach. And that, calling us pigs, crossed the line. I'm sorry.
He mentioned that the prime minister should have moved certain ministers, one of which would have been the Minister of National Security, the Honorable Lee Monroe. What is your response to him making such a statement, or making such or telling the prime minister pretty much what to do?
Well, he's not prime minister, so he doesn't get to do it. The prime minister is the prime minister. He gets to do it. And we have confidence in his choices, and that's it. The rest, that's up to him.
All right. Any final thoughts?
Well, I want to, thank the people of Grand Bahama in particular, the people of the Bahamas generally, for their continued support of the government and of the Prime Minister. We look forward to working with people in Grand Bahama and throughout the country in trying to make the country better. I had a very interesting meeting with the people of Acklands last night, and I'm, in touch with people up in Abaco, and people are concerned generally with issues like inflation and the cost of living, their pension, retirement, jobs, all of those kinds of things. And those are the issues we ought to be dividing on, not, calling one another names in public. And that's the commitment which the Progressive Liberal Party makes. And I do so again on behalf of Prime Minister Philip Davis. Our gratefulness to the Bahamian public for their support.
Thank you so much, Minister.
You're welcome.